What's going on YouTube? Mike here with I Heart Knives, and in this video we're going to be doing a sharpening of the Grimsmo Norseman, and we're going to be doing something a little different. We'll be doing the fixed angle sharpening on the Hapstone K1. So, getting right into it, go ahead and mark the edge with a Sharpie. I went and threw on 400 grit silicon carbide stone, and going to start checking the angle. And off the bat it looked good. I think I made just like a minor adjustment to it, and for the most part it was good. I should also mention that I did the front of the blade with freehand stones and stropped it. The front of the blade was a little bit tricky because there was kind of two angles that had to be blended into one. Obviously, the main portion of the blade that carries a different angle, and it's also a recurve, and it has a pretty serious recurve. It's almost like a U shape, but obviously it's not pronounced. So like the front and back of the knife is probably like a 1/16 of an inch lower than the middle of the knife. It's got a pretty pronounced frown. It's the first knife I've ever seen with that much of like a perfect frown. Usually knives will have recurve, or knives that do have recurve, it tends to be like toward one end. This one is like perfectly blended, like from the middle out to the two ends. So they do give a sharpening notch at the end, which is nice. It's not a real big sharpening notch, but as you sharpen it back, you can obviously, you can just take a Dremel tool and fix that if you had to. All in all, it was a fairly straightforward knife to sharpen. It is a little bit tricky. You can tell I'm checking it often. I'm not just like blindly sharpening, because this is an expensive knife. I took my time. I wanted to make sure I was doing it right, and I don't want to take off too much steel. This is RWL 34, which is sort of like a CPM 154 or 154 CM type steel. So you'll get decent edge retention, but it's also soft enough that it's fairly easy to sharpen. So then I went to a 600 grit silicon carbide stone. These are the narrow stones, the 1/2 inch stones. I got them off of Gritomatic. They're fairly inexpensive. They're like $15 roughly. Some are cheaper, some are more. For the 1/2 inch stones, you don't get a ton of options. You get a few Edge Pro stones. You get a few Gritomatic stones, or Veneve is the company, but sold by Gritomatic. You don't really get a ton of options though. I mean, you can get, I think they sell a couple like CBN stones, but they're incredibly expensive. RWL 34 is a powder metal steel. It's actually made by Steel. It's a French steel. It's basically their version of Crucible 154 CM. It actually was a little bit harder than I thought to sharpen at first. When I was freehand sharpening it, and I don't mean like difficulty, I mean like the steel itself was actually a little bit harder than I anticipated. But when I was freehand sharpening the front part of the edge, the tip back to the start of the recurve, it took a really nice edge, but it was a little bit harder than I thought it would be. I thought it was going to be like a soft steel, but it held up good, and edge retention was good with it. The recurve part obviously takes the brunt of any draw cuts that you make, but the tip is where you make a lot of the cuts if you're doing like box opening and stuff like that. But I did a decent amount of cardboard cutting with it. John said just use it as much as you want, and he asked if I'd be willing to sharpen it, and I said sure. So here we are. The last part of it is I took a 1/2 inch cowhide strop, and I loaded it with 2 micron. That's what I finished with. I kept it fairly coarse. Just like a working edge. If John wants to throw it on the KME and do like a high polish, obviously that's up to him. For 154 cm, you can definitely do a high polish. The reason I kept it, at like a fairly coarse-ish or like medium fineness grit, finishing at 1200 silicon carbide and then going to 2 micron, is because I didn't have a lot of stones to bring it up to that polish. So, obviously if I had the 1/2 inch stones that went up to 1 micron or 1/2 micron, I would do it. But, in this case, finishing at 1200 silicon carbide and then going to the 2 micron cowhide strop, I felt that was sufficient. The cowhide strop from Veneve is okay. It's not that dry, which is good. So, wherever he gets his cowhide from, the veg tan is probably oiled at some point, because it wasn't, it was fairly supple, considering a lot of veg tan that you get is really dry. This was pretty supple, so that's cool. And the thickness level is basically the same as the stone, so that worked out well. So I just went ahead and stropped, and then once that was finished, I popped the knife out and I went ahead and freehand stropped on the 2 micron. Even though this portion was sharpened before, I figured I would just throw it on the strop. I did use painter's tape to just protect the blade, because it has such a nice finish, and the Hapstone K1 does have a tendency to scratch blades if you're not careful. So that is one warning, that I'll put out there for you guys. The recurve part, the bevel, was very symmetrical. The thickness was all the same right across, so that's good. And then the end of the recurve to the tip, that was like a transitional angle, since it's basically 2 different angles blended into one. So that was a little bit more tricky. I hope this helps any of you guys, thinking about sharpening a Norseman. Freehand would definitely be more difficult. I just figured it would be, it'd be easier to throw it on the Hapstone K1 and just get it done that way. Since it's such a nice knife, I figured best to do it that way and keep the edge nice. Alright guys, if you guys have any questions, leave them in the comments. Please remember to give this video a thumbs up, subscribe. We're going to be doing the 500 subscriber giveaway soon. We're almost there, so keep that in mind. And make sure you subscribe so we get to the 500 mark and I could give away a really sweet giveaway. Alright guys, thanks for watching the video. If you have any questions, again, leave them in the comments or email me at iheartknives@yahoo.com. And I'll see you guys on the next one.